painting is just a different form of expressing how we're really feeling or thinking. And our storytelling is a big part, our yarning circles, getting together with the family, and also for our children to be sitting there with us and sharing and laughing and sharing their stories with us too. I think as Aboriginal people, we have learned to survive through the tough times and the good times, the bad times, but we laugh. We do have a good sense of humour. We tell our stories and we laugh about them. And we do make jokes about ourselves. And I think this is a way of coping in the past. And even today, my family still come over, we sit in a circle, we take turns at telling stories and yarns, and we love it. And I think that's the other reason why I went into early childhood, because you could sit on the floor with the children, you could interact, you could laugh, you could tell stories, you could be the pirate, or you could be the policeman or the nurse or whatever, that character from a book, and you could act it out. And to me, that's what our culture is about, doing our dances, imitating the animals, our environment, nature, being one with nature, and being a part of that, and expressing it in a different form. So to me, this is where I get my theory. My theorists come from within my culture, my community in which I live, my friends, the people that I've met on my life's journey, whether it's been a very difficult or a very pleasant time, I've still learnt from that. And it is really important for us to not only get our theorists and our theories from books, but to actually start looking at the people around us and in our community and observe and learn and impart knowledge with and to each other. And also it's very important that we must do that also with our children.
So I'd like to show you some examples of some drawings that have been created collaboratively with adults and children, just to kind of elucidate on some of the issues I've been talking about. When you look at this drawing, it really just looks like a regular child's drawing, and of course if I was given this after a child had completed it, I would have to try and figure out what was in the drawing and interpret the contents of the drawing based on just my own thinking and without having experienced what the child had been learning about or talking about. But this drawing was created with adults and children working together, and I was around when this was created. And so for the adult and the child who worked on this together, there's a shared experience of this drawing that's much deeper than what is seen on the paper. So for example, there are some recognisable images here. You know, we can see kind of face type images, a spider or a sun, or and lines and scribbles and so on. But the meanings behind these drawings are far greater than what is seen here. And that's because all those activities occurred while the adult and the child were drawing together. And so that's a kind of remembered thing for both the adult and the child. And the drawing acts as a prompt for the whole range of activities that went on when it was created. One interesting aspect of this, and I'll just put my hand under here to show, is one of the concepts around drawing that I really focus on is the idea of a drawing as being immersive. And this was a great example seen here, whereby a child became so immersed in the process of drawing that they worked their way through the entire paper. And this can be viewed as an example of this kind of Deleuzian concept of out-of-bodiness that he talks about in the text Anti-Oedipus. This is whereby a child becomes into the tool and the action of drawing. So there's a kind of rocking motion backwards and forwards. It's not something that's done consciously, but more subconsciously. And that I find a very potent demonstration of a child completely immersed in their learning and completely immersed in the activity of drawing. That's totally missed if the child does that by themselves and then hands that to the teacher. This just becomes a hole in the paper when it's actually handed to a person who hasn't been there while the drawing's being completed. And so this area here might have had happen with it things like some kind of physical rocking, some kind of storytelling, some kind of singing, some kind of noise making, and all of that is information for an adult to have about a child's experience of learning. And so the stimulus activity that feeds into this drawing, the kind of other things that are happening around the child as the drawing takes place, all impact on this particular action and this particular response. And so that's a very potent area of this drawing, because it really does show how deeply involved children get with their learning. An important thing to talk about at this point is these drawings are not art activities. These drawings are a kind of demonstration of learning about all kinds of things.
I was very privileged to be involved in the Mapping Literacy project, which led to Literacies Communities and Under Fives in New South Wales, where I worked with people from a number of different universities to look at young children's literacy experiences at home and in early childhood settings, and how educators could best support children's literacy learning. And that experience really gave me great insights into children's experiences with literacy in their families and communities, particularly bilingual children and children from a range of different socioeconomic backgrounds. And it challenged a lot of my assumptions about how children learn literacy and the sorts of experiences that they might have in their families and communities. And it led me to look more closely at sociocultural theories, which emphasise the learning that happens in children's homes and communities, and the very important role that families might have, and to challenge some of the deficit views that are sometimes promoted about children's learning, that suggest perhaps that children who don't have books at home or children who don't have a lot of experiences in English are somehow disadvantaged. And it encourages us to look at the diversity of children's experiences and the strengths and what Moll calls the funds of knowledge that those children bring to early childhood settings. By funds of knowledge, what Moll means is the interests, the strengths, the experiences that children have within their families and communities. And so those funds of knowledge, those experiences and those strengths are quite different across different families and communities. And that doesn't mean that any are better or worse than others, just that they're different. And unfortunately, what happens in many early childhood settings and schools is we only value one set of experiences. So we value experiences with books and experiences in English, and experiences where we might go to the museum and we might have particular types of interactions with different sorts of texts. And we tend to not value experiences in languages other than English, experiences with television and computers, with popular media culture. And so we're not recognising all the learning that's going on in those sorts of experiences that are very important for many children, and it's where a lot of learning and a lot of literacy learning is occurring for many children as they engage with computer games, as they view and talk about their favourite television programs and DVDs. They're learning lots about character, narrative, the structure of narratives, the plot, the way that issues are negotiated and resolved, so conflict resolution. All of those learnings are occurring with a range of texts, including texts of popular culture, particularly if adults interact with children and talk with them about the issues and the characters and the narratives within those texts. There's also lots of opportunities for critical literacy when we engage children with popular culture, so rather than banning popular culture, which is one response to some of the concerns about sexism, violence, etc. Engaging children in critical literacy enables us to open up some of those issues for discussion. So to engage children in discussions about gender roles, power relationships, consumerism, and so on. It's a very good way because children are interested in popular culture, they're interested in issues of power and what it means to be a boy and a girl and the way that products are marketed to children. So there's lots of rich opportunities to engage children in those sorts of discussions, which enables them to be more critical themselves as consumers and to start to question some taken for granted assumptions about what it means to be a boy or a girl in our society.
An important thing to establish with these types of drawings, they are not arts activities, they are not artworks. Children don't see them as such. And even though historically children's drawings have been valorised as artworks, they really shouldn't be regarded in that way. And that's not to say that children don't create artworks, because they do. They make aesthetic decisions, they make a creative response to their world, they make pictures about stories, they make responses about alternatives, creative alternatives. They do the things that artists continue to do as adults. These drawings are also evidence of learning about all kinds of other subjects. Children are curious about the world, we know that. We know that they like to figure out why things are the way they are, what are future possibilities, what are the things that concern them. They are also interested in figuring out how things work, how things grow, where children come from, where animals come from, where the world comes from, and all of these things are poured into drawings like this.
I can see because they're learning the environment, they're learning the language, they're still participating in ceremony dancing and singing and painting. And every day I do that, I'm painting them every day with identity. I'm painting them with resilience. I'm painting them with strong, confident. I'm doing that by taking them out to the beach and let them exploring the environment itself, making them on the beach, cooking it in the coals, or getting that right fish that is the good season for this, talking about the season while we're doing the cooking, or getting that turtle eggs. How do you get it? At the same time, kids are saying, "Mom, come and listen to my read at the school." So I'm painting them with two knowledges, mainstream and indigenous ideas, so they can be strong. With two knowledges, they'll be more strong, and that's my goal towards my kids and my goal for the next generation growing up, because we need to see where the EYLF is taking us, because we want to get the same outcome, but we have to come in a different way and understand where we go.
So, for example, there are aspects in this drawing whereby we can see some recognisable shapes, but there are areas that seem more abstract, and again we've got some evidence of this deeply immersive drawing, and in this case ink work, whereby it's actually worn through the surface of the paper. And so this drawing is a figuring out of what's going on in terms of nature and science and the development of plants. This was an interesting drawing, and the reason I've chosen it is because the children who created it and the adult who worked with them also, they spent a time on one area of the paper and then they rotated around the paper and started anew in a different space. So children were working alongside or over the work of the child before them. What's interesting is that some of the shapes and drawings that were created by the prior child have been obliterated by the subsequent child. And again, all of that is missed if this is given as a finished drawing to a teacher. And so a teacher might look at this in a different way to a teacher or an educator who has actually created the drawing with children. There are reasons why those children obliterated some of those images. It's not always a kind of destructive reason. There are other reasons why a child might want to cover up something. And so I'm very interested in all of that, and also how this then weaves into the other types of productions that children make during their learning, both in informal and formal settings. I would like educators, I'd like early childhood staff and carers and professionals to regard drawings slightly differently. I would like them to think about drawings more than a decoration for the wall. I would like them to think about drawings as being more than an incidental pastime or as a beautification exercise, because quite clearly from the drawings I've shown here, they are not always beautiful. I would not describe this drawing as beautiful. For me, this is a deeply interesting and deeply meaningful piece of work. And it's also a repository of what's been learnt about by a group of children around some quite significant concepts of growth and science learning. For the educator who worked with these children, this is a very rich repository of information. And actually it works alongside lots of other types of ways of gathering information on what children are thinking and conceptualising. So there might be conversations held with children, there might be reports written about the words children create around their thinking. And I would like to see drawing included in those things and taken quite seriously as pieces of learning and pieces of rigorous activity.
I'm going to talk to you today about communities of practice, which is a way of thinking about the world that I was introduced to by Etienne Wenger, who is probably the person that most people have heard of associated with communities of practice. So communities of practice is a wonderful way of thinking about what we do with each other in groups. We're all members of different communities, and they're not communities in that sort of happy togetherness sense, but they're ways that we think together, ways that we do things together, and they're ways of learning, really. I think it was communities of practice that helped me figure out what it means to learn, because Wenger has given us a way of thinking that says learning is participation in practices that count in a particular community. And we're all members of different communities, so you might be a member of an early childhood community, all of us are probably, but if you happen to have had your training as a primary school teacher, then you're a member of a different community. The community overlaps with the early childhood community, but it's different. And therefore, you probably think about things slightly differently. And there's a bit of a boundary between the early childhood and the primary community. There's even a boundary between those people who work in the in the school context and the childcare context, which is also another slightly different community. All those ideas about community have underpinned my work now with Indigenous people, because the community that I grew up in, and you can hear it in my voice, I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and I've spent half of my life there learning to be American. I've then moved to Australia and learned how to be Australian, and I'm both. So I embody both communities in the way that I engage in the world. But I've learned how to be through being in those communities. And I think about that when I engage with Indigenous people, because they've had to learn how to be in multiple communities, and as we all do, in fact. But the difference between the communities that they've grown up in and the communities they're expected to participate in the mainstream society are probably bigger and harder to negotiate.